Okay, let me get round here so I can introduce you properly. Thanks. Okay, good morning, ladies and gents, and very big best wishes and thanks to Ronnie Hazell for coming here and giving this presentation under duress. And thanks for bringing him, Renee. I believe it was quite difficult to get him here. Anyway, Ronnie doesn't need introduction. He's a legendary diamond geologist, right, Ronnie? And he's seen the world. So he's going to tell us about his experiences today in Russia, good and bad. And we really look forward to that. Ronnie's very versatile in many other things as well. He's a great birder. And at some stage, we'll get him to give a talk on that, which you'll probably enjoy more than talking about Russia. But anyway, I'm going to leave it to you, Ronnie, and we look forward to the boots and all presentation. And you can tell us like it was. Okay, all the very best, but thanks for coming along.
Ну, как сказал в России, доброе утро. Мне очень приятно вас здесь. I'm very pleased to see you here, but it's not in Russian. I'll do it in English because my Russian is lousy. So, why did I go? What? Okay, so that doesn't work. There you go. Okay. So this is the talk about Russia, diamonds, and life, because there's an awful lot of diamonds, there's an awful lot of life. But we lived in Russia in 1993. We moved there. That's Renee and me, and the young lady in the front here, who was very brave to come with me. And I was working in Johannesburg as consulting geologist for De Beers, and I was looking after diamonds in Africa, north of Botswana. And there wasn't an awful lot happening. And I got involved with the Russians, and we decided that if we wanted to get anywhere with Russia, and Russia had huge potential diamond reserves, that we needed to put someone on the ground. And because we couldn't find anybody else, I volunteered to go. And so we went and we spent 3 years there. We were trying to get a foothold, as I say, in the Russian diamond industry, but it was very hard. We didn't really get very far. And the reason we went, of course, was that everybody knows what diamonds are about. That's not a typical run-of-mine diamond parcel, but that's the lure of diamonds. And De Beers obviously was very successful when they established the myth that diamonds have value. And I owe my whole livelihood to them having established that myth, and as do many people in the diamond industry. But really, they're just pretty stones. Of course, the production from the mine looks more like that. Well, those have been sorted by size, but those pretty colored diamonds are not that common. So Russia is a vast country. It covers 140 degrees of longitude. So it covers 10 time zones. South Africa covers half a time zone. So that gives you some idea. It's 17 million square kilometers versus South Africa's 1.2 million square kilometers. And it's a monster. And so the diamonds were originally found at, does this pointer work? Oh, it works there. You can see that vaguely. There's alluvial deposits in the Ural Mountains. The Ural Mountains stretch down here and really define European Russia from the rest. And then they were found later near to Udachny, which is this mine here in Sakha province, by there were two girls, two female geologists, Larissa Popogayeva, and the other one I would have had on my notes, which I would have had next to me if I was doing this presentation the way I want to do it, but I can't see it now, so I've forgotten her name. And the one whose name I can't remember was working in the lab, and she was checking out the fact that kimberlitic minerals identify kimberlites. So when you look for a kimberlite, you don't look for diamonds because they're too rare. You look for the minerals that are associated with diamonds and kimberlites, and they have a particular chemistry, and John knows all about that. And so they were there, and this Larissa Popogayeva was in the field, and she found the Zarnitsa pipe, which is a pipe near to Udachny, not far away from it. And that was the first. That was in 1954, and that was the time when Khrushchev was the boss of Russia, and he wasn't a very nice man. We went there to try and get some idea of the reserves, etc. We have to start with the production. If we look at the production from the world, you see Russia has been the top producer of diamonds for a great many years and will continue to be because they have enormous reserves. Botswana has always been the gem in De Beers's hat. And more recently, Canada's come on board, but Russia really produces as many diamonds as the rest of the world apart from Botswana. When we went there, we were trying to get a handle on Russian reserves. And it was the one thing they would never talk to us about. Of course, we in De Beers likewise did not share ore reserve information. It's considered quite strategic, important information. And the Russians would do anything except share it. But one can go on the internet now, and whether these figures are real or not, these are the numbers that you get. And these are huge numbers. These are reserves in millions of carats, not carats, millions of carats. So there's about 1 billion carats if you add that up there. And the mines, the kimberlites that we saw when we were there, were Mirny was the first major mine. Next to it is International, and then Udachny was the other big one, and Zarnitsa. So we were looking, we knew there was potential for others, and that's what we wanted to get under the skin of the Russians to find out. But you can see, as I say, these are just enormous. Whether they're mineable, the Russians had no idea about mining geology. In fact, De Beers even established a chair for mining geology at Moscow State University in the hope that we could be able to communicate better with the Russians, because they just had no idea. They thought if there were some copper in the ground, you could take it out, because when Stalin ruled the world and when the Russians ruled the world in that manner, in command mentality, they mined things whether they paid or not. It didn't matter. There was no concept of province of mining costs or profit. So there's the Sakha province. It's a vast, independent or semi-autonomous province within Russia. It's enormous. It's quite an interesting place. The average annual temperature in Sakha is -8 degrees Celsius. That's the average annual temperature, so it's kind of cold, eh? The Craton, which is the stable geological part of the Earth's crust where the diamonds occur, is really here in the east of Sakha province. And there one can see a map. Unfortunately, that bar across the top is still there, but that's basically the kimberlite field shown in red. The capital of the province is out here somewhere, Yakutsk, and Mirny is this one down here. That's the first major mine. That's Udachny and Ikol, and then there are other kimberlites that they've found subsequently. If one looks at the satellite image, you can see what a bleak area it is. Those dots, those little white dots that you can see here with the names next to them, are mines that you can see, and the little towns that are associated with them. And there's a big dam here, but for the rest, there's nothing. There's one road that goes from Mirny up to Udachnaya. It's a distance of 450 kilometers as the crow flies, but one travels there by plane most of the time. But so it really is remote, and there's just nothing there at all. That's what the roads look like. That's taken in probably in early summer. So the snow has melted off the trees, but you still have a snow road. That's looking down at Mirny. You can see the open pit in the center here. That's the kimberlite was mined there. There's the airstrip. You can see that. Here's the modern part of the town and the old part of the town here. And then various other infrastructure around about. And if we take a more distant view, you can see that there is the international kimberlite pipe there. Now, when I went there, we visited Mirny quite regularly because they like to show it off. They were still being mined as an open pit. And they had stopped mining a smaller pipe nearby the international pipe as an open pit, and they were mining it underground. And that was posed quite an interesting problem, because not only did they find diamonds in international when they went underground, they had oil dripping on their heads all the time. So there was gas and oil. It was really a major problem. And they thought, well, there's something going on here. So the more recent satellite imagery, this wasn't like it was when I was there. You suddenly see all these little white dots and roads and things here. And this is all development of an oil field in the area. And if you look at those more close, there's another one further down to the southeast. The whole of that southeastern part of Sakha province is covered with these little development plots where they've put in wells. And if one looks at them more closely, that's what just one of them looks like. So there's an enormous industry. You can see the flares in this picture for the oil. So there are refineries there. There are oil wells. They produce the most enormous amount of oil. And I had the figures on my presentation view. I don't have them anymore. They've got 13 billion or 12 billion cubic meters of gas. 12 trillion cubic meters of gas. I worked out that's household gas that we use. It's enough gas in just the Sakha gas fields to give every person on Earth, all 7 billion of them, each 17,045 kilogram gas bottles. That's and this came about because they found oil dripping on their heads in the mine there. Then they went and they started doing this exploration, and there are huge reserves in oil. I mean, it's just beyond belief, the reserves that they have there. Then one goes back to Mirny. As you drive into Mirny, the town where all the mining activity is centered, the first thing you see is this great sculpture, which is diamond geologists will know that that's a representation of the diatreme facies of a kimberlite pipe. So a kimberlite pipe is something that blasts out to the surface at great speed, and it's as it gains momentum and strength, and the weight on top of it is reduced, it explodes out into the surface, and it forms this carrot-shaped intrusive body, and then kimberlite and country rocks fall back into it, and a crater forms on the surface, and the diamonds wash into the crater, and so they have different types of mining. So you do crater facies mining in sediments on top of the kimberlite, and then you get down into the kimberlite itself, and you mine in the diatreme, which is the main ore body in kimberlites, and that's how it's shaped. There's again the kimberlite pipe in Mirny. This is when they were still mining it. You can see the haul road going down into it, and this is what it looks like today. The mining has collapsed. Underground mining, at least open pit mining, stopped in 2001, and they went underground, and they mined underground successfully until 2017. And in 2017, they had left an insufficient cork of kimberlite above themselves, at the bottom of the crater, and the crater filled up with a lot of water, and it suddenly burst through. And they were about 140 miners underground at the time, and they saved all but 8 of them, I think. So then they lost their underground workings, and they're only just now starting to establish that underground system again, because it's taken a huge amount of recovery to do that. But the Russians are not people who give up easily. There you can see the modern town in the background behind the pipe, and further across up here, the old town, and that is where Khrushchev sent his workers when they first went there, and that's what it looks like now from the air. So they lived in a village almost. I imagine that these are probably the dachas of the people who now live in the big housing. So they would have a little country house outside where they could go and grow their vegetables, and they built houses. When they got there, they had to take their axes and go into the forest and cut down trees. There was no shortage of trees in Siberia, and they built on the permafrost. And the permafrost is a big problem because, as you know, if you put a weight on a block of ice, it melts. So when you put a weight on permafrost, and the whole area is permafrost, it melts. So you put down, when you're putting up a building, you have to put down piles. They didn't do it with these cottages because they weren't heavy enough. But if they went to a large building like, for instance, the Tsarnitsa Hotel, which is in Mirny, where I've stayed on many occasions. They painted it blue since I was there. And you can see on there, you probably can't see it, but that little thermometer, that little red thing says minus 17 degrees Celsius. That's quite normal. So they had to stabilize. They put down very deep piles into the ground beneath the hotel, into the permafrost. But then they had to stabilize it because the weight of the building still melted the ice. So the buildings would collapse. So then they had to put in a system called thermosiphons. And a thermosiphon is a pipe. It's usually about 8 inches in diameter, I guess. And they just push these down into the foundations all the way around the building. And they fill them with something that doesn't freeze. I would imagine alcohol would be the best thing to put in, but then the Russians would get their straws and drink it. But so the idea being that this siphon, this pipe sticks out in the ground, and it causes convection of the colder air, and it takes the cold down and brings up the warmth from the permafrost as the permafrost is warming up under pressure. And those thermosiphons stabilize the foundations of thousands of buildings throughout Russia. It's very cunning. Nowadays, I think they live in these modern apartment blocks. You can see this is a typical Russian town, the apartment blocks where the people live, and then rows of garages. You never have your garage next to your house. In fact, we knew people in Moscow whose garage was maybe 5 kilometers from their house sometimes, so having a car didn't really help you much off all the time. So going further north, the two kimberlites I spoke about further up, 450 kilometers further north, are Udachnaya and Aikol. And I'll just zoom in on Udachnaya. And the first thing you see here is the airfield and the road in from the airfield to the town. There's the open pit. It's a massive pit. And they wanted it, when they started it, they were quite proud to say how they'd built this dam. We were flying over it. Luckily, we weren't driving. We were going in a helicopter. And we looked down and he said, you know how we built that dam? We said, how? And they said, well, we didn't want to waste time doing earth moving and building a wall. We thought the quickest way would be to drill a deep hole down where we wanted to do it. And they put what's his name? A bomb, a nuclear device, a nuclear bomb down there, and exploded it. And that lifted the earth and caused the dam. And of course, they were quite proud of this, but the people who live in Udachnaya all suffer from radioactive sickness. And I've witnessed it. I've been to their hospitals because when I visited there, they would invite us to the hospital so we could see these sickly kids. And it was awful to see. Pale, they would have them under infrared lamps and things to try and give them some color and give them some life. But they were pale, anemic kids. And they asked us all the time, please give us money. We know, speak to the Oppenheimers to send us some money so we can help these kids. And I think the Oppenheimers did do something. But really, it was a horrible thing to see, and they were quite proud of that. The kimberlite itself is a massive hole. It really is. I don't think it's being open cast mine anymore. I think it's probably underground. I've stood on the side of that pit, looking down and showing other visitors from South Africa when the temperature was minus 55. It's very cold. And I did it very quickly, and I was in all my thermal underwear and all the heavy coats and things that you wear in Russia. And my vehicle was standing behind there with the heater on. And as we'd finished the thing, and I said, come on, let's get back in, a Russian television crew arrived, not a Russian, a German television crew arrived, and they wanted to interview me. So they interviewed me on the wall on the side of this pit, and the temperature, as I say, my mouth was frozen. I couldn't speak. It was quite strange. It really was. Minus 55 is cold. So you can see why. So that's the Arctic Circle, and you all scientists, you all know that the Arctic Circle is the latitude at which the sun, beyond which the sun never sets in summer and it never rises in winter. And that's at about 65 degrees north. The Arctic Circle, 66 degrees north, and the areas where Udachnaya sits just about on it. So it's a pretty cold place. That's looking into one of the pits up there. I think it's the Aikol pit, and you can see they're still working in this one here. There's some drills, which you can see here, and they're blasting, and then they're excavating the material and taking it up the whole road to the plant. When it goes down to minus 65 degrees sometimes in winter in Saka, because it's such a continent, because it's really continental. That's why it's so extreme. It goes from plus 35 in summer to minus 65 in winter. And when these trucks go down into the mine, the earth-moving kit, they either have to be driven by a fitter, or they have to have a fitter in the truck with them. Because if something goes wrong and they don't fix it immediately, it freezes and they can't do anything. They have to leave it standing there till summer comes and it thaws out. So, and they have to keep their tools warm, because otherwise they stick to you. You can't use these. So it's a hell of a process these guys go through to live and mine in these environments. There again, you can see a large truck being filled at the bottom of the pit by a very large excavator. So there are some other kimberlites in the area that were found subsequent to my being there. I didn't even know this was one, but these were the things we wanted to look for. So here's one. There's a pit being mined here, and there's a second one there, and a third one just starting here. And this is again, my notes are missing. Oh, I forget the name. And there's another one you can see there. And it's quite interesting. When you look at these things on the map, they'll give them one name. When you look at it on another map, they give it another name. They like to confuse you. They've got about 3 names for every body there, so you never know which one you're talking about. When it gets cold in winter, it gets very cold. So that looks like snow, but it's crisp. It's brittle ice on the spruce trees, and it really, I mean, it's vicious. And there again, you can see it erode through that bleak winter landscape. Okay, so I was doing this, looking at these things while I worked there, and I did some trips in there. But in 1993 was when we moved there, Renee and I, to go and live. But in 1992, we did a trip. De Beers, chief consulting mining engineer, a fellow called Kobus van Jaarsveld and his wife, and another mining engineer, and Renee and myself, and an interpreter who was the professor of Russian at WITS. We went on a trip. So we met up in Beijing, and we went across to Shenyang, which is in northeast China. De Beers actually did some work there, so we had an interpreter we could contact there. Shenyang is a city of 10 million people. They had never seen a Guelo there before, hardly. I mean, they looked at us as if to say, what are these people? You know, Guelo is a long nose. And we had to fly from Shenyang. We wanted to fly on a Friday to Irkutsk and swim in Lake Baikal, because you must swim in Lake Baikal if you go anywhere near there. But unfortunately, we were kicked off the plane. Renee and I lost our luggage. It went on. The rest of us were kicked off because Russians were bribing people. And so we were then stuck. And they said, well, there's not another plane for another week. So we set about trying to find, and eventually we got a plane that went on the Monday morning. But it was hard work. And we flew into Irkutsk. We didn't have time to swim in Lake Baikal because we had to get on. Our hosts were waiting for us in Mirny, where they were going to sit down and have chats with us and talk to us about life of mine and oil reserves and potential for getting involved. So we flew in there, but they had other ideas because they always have to entertain you to make sure you don't talk work. So we flew into theirs. There's Mirny there. They wanted to take us to Chernyshevsky Dam. So they got us up early in the morning, gave us breakfast, and they drove us to Chernyshevsky Dam. And there's a big hydroelectric project, which they get their power from the Chernyshevsky Dam. It's a massive project. They gave us another breakfast there. Then they put us in boats and they took us out on the lake. There you can see it's a 2,500 square kilometer area covered with this water. And this is what it looks like in winter when it's frozen. There's just a small portion of it all iced over. And there's the boat they took us out on. It was autumn, so there was no ice, luckily, but it was still jolly cold. And we parked next to an island, and they put a gangplank on the side there, and we had to walk across it. And here you can see some of the girls being helped across onto the island. And when we got there, they gave us food because now you don't want to talk, you've got to eat. Your mouth must be full. They give you shashlik. You know, you can see these shashlik here. That's a society. I mean, here's poor Ali van Jaarsveld with a shashlik about a foot long. Renee's obviously was hungry because she's eaten most of hers. And this is our Russian interpreter. She's also hungry. And there were always Russian photographers around to record our activities. And then they sat us down to a meal after having had all those shashlik. And then we went back, and then they fed us on more vodka, and always pulling a cucumber out of their pocket and a bottle of vodka. That's what they live on. It was quite weird. And then they got us back to Merdi, and they took us out to a dacha. And they gave us a massive dinner that went on till 11 o'clock at night. We'd never had a chance to talk any work at all. And the next day we had to fly north to Olenyok because we were now going up to Anabar. So Olenyok is kind of like a refueling stop halfway up there. And we arrived at the airfield at Olenyok. This was one of the main buildings on the airfield. It's a very small town, just an airfield and not much else. It was made of wood. And there you could see we flew in the ever-present MIL M8 helicopter. Russia's made about 17,000 of these M8 helicopters. It's the ultimate workhorse. We flew in them all the time, and the most revolting, ghastly thing, and you can see from the look of this plane, they didn't do much housekeeping on the outside, and I can tell you the inside was no better. There was a toilet at Olenyok, which I have pictures of, but I wouldn't dare show them to you. I wouldn't even deign to describe it. It was so utterly revolting. I mean, it was just beyond belief what a ghastly place it was. Anyway, we refueled there, got back in the chopper, and flew off. Oh, there's Kobus van Jaarsveld, the chief mining engineer, and Renee there. She's wearing my coat because she didn't like the one they gave her. And we carried on. So we've gone to Shenyang, from Shenyang to Irkutsk to Mirny. We'd stopped at a Dutch now. We'd gone to Olenyok, and now we were going up to Anabar, which is way inside the Arctic Circle because they had some diamonds up there they wanted to show us. Well, they didn't want to show it them, so we wanted to see them. And there we landed in our helicopter. We had to divert via a geologist's field camp to go and see what he was doing. So we landed he was camped next to the river just behind here where I took the photograph. And these are the ladies. That's Renee and Ali and our Russian interpreter, Henrietta Mondry. And this is one of our mining engineers. And this is where we landed the helicopter. And we were taken up to his camp, which was quite an imposing camp. A simple tent in a clearing. It was autumn, so it was very beautiful. But a tent which had wooden boards on the floor covered by reindeer skins and a stove in the corner so that he could keep warm. And you can see the chimney of the stove sticking out there. And no other facilities whatsoever. That was it. He was there on his own doing his exploration. I don't think he had a bath in a few months. That's him with Rene. This was this geologist. Is not the normal geologist you guys are used to seeing. Eh? He was quite a character. He didn't speak any English at all, but our Russian was pretty awful, so we couldn't really communicate too well with him. We did everything through interpreters. And there was his fireplace where he prepared his meals. And you can see the river in the background, and there was the helicopter was parked just off to the side. And this was the meal he gave us. So he had some salmon he'd caught in the river, and he'd cooked up this fish. He'd been cooking it for 3 days. He said, it's better if you cook it for 3 days. And it was absolutely revolting. And we'd taken along packets of bread and things as well. And of course, there was always vodka. And in this jar here, this is a jar of ikra. Ikra is Russian for caviar. So all these fish you pull out of the river, you give them a squeeze, and out comes gallons of red caviar, ikra. But they don't know how to preserve it too well, so they oversalt it, but they put it on everything. And it's very nice if it's not oversalted, but they really ruined it like that. Anyway, we left his camp eventually. Oh, while we were there, the helicopter packed up. We went, sat in his tent. It wasn't getting dark because the days didn't never end. But we were sitting there for hours, and we said, well, aren't we going to fly on somewhere? And he said, well, hang on. Then they said, oh, the helicopter's actually just packed up. So what now? But they managed to get the helicopter high enough in the air for a very short moment, just to send a radio signal to send another one. So eventually another helicopter arrived, and it was on its way to deliver explosives to another geologist's fuel tank because he was doing some geophysics. So we piled into this thing. There were no seats. You just sit on boxes of explosives, and the Russians stubbed their cigarettes out on the fuel lines, because there are always fuel tanks inside there, and on the explosives, and you just sit anywhere. There are no seat belts. I mean, it's really rough. And we got to this geologist field camp, and we said there wasn't time for us to stop and give him the explosives. So we just had the door open, and we just pushed the crates of explosives out, and they fell on the ground, and we flew off. And luckily they didn't blow up. It was just so weird, eh? Anyway, so we went and we landed at Anabar. There's a little village here. It's called another of these places with 2 names. You see, it's called something else, Saskilak. That's next, not far, probably a few hundred kilometers away from the Poppyguy crater. Now, Poppyguy is a place, it was mentioned on that list of diamond reserves I showed you earlier, but those are diamonds caused by a meteorite hitting the Earth and the impact forming very tiny crystals of diamonds in the debris that was scattered around. But they don't, obviously there's no economic value, but they regard it as one of their diamond reserves. They don't have any idea what it has, but it contains diamonds. And then subsequent to our going there, they then discovered a kimberlite here called Ebelyak. It's somewhere here, I don't know. They're not mining it, but they're mining the alluvial diamonds that are dispersed in the rivers flowing from it. So they've got, that's what that place looks like there. You can see there's an airstrip. I keep using my finger. There's an airstrip, and you can see here there's some workings on the rivers. We actually, none of this had happened when we were there. And we just had the joy of going to this place called Anabar. Our helicopter landed some distance from the town. We had to walk up a path through the forest, and suddenly the path made a diversion because we had to go past the long drop. The long drop, permafrost, you can't dig a hole in the ground for a long drop. So they had a ladder going into the tree, and the long drop was from the tree into what had been the path, which we had to go around. So more Russian stories. So when we then eventually, after we got back to Moscow after that trip, and I'll be back to Johannesburg, and then in 1993, Renee and I went to Moscow. So here's what Moscow looks like on the satellite image. There's the Kremlin, this red dot here, and Moscow looks like a bicycle wheel with concentric ring roads and all the main roads going out like radii. And there's the Sheremetyevo airport. It's a huge international airport, the main airport for Moscow. But it's one of a few, but it's an enormous airport. And we were kind of shocked when we arrived there on that day. The first thing we saw as we went into the airport was no information, no transit. It was not a good start. You don't feel that you've arrived in a place where things are likely to happen or you're likely to get through. But we got through, fighting with all these people on the planes and getting off, and we got through. And we ended up, when we went to stay in Moscow, and we stayed in the Radisson Hotel because we were going there. We had to find housing when we got there. We had nothing organized at all. So we stayed in the Radisson Hotel here. And here's the Moskva River in the foreground. This is a more recent picture because you can see they're modern buildings. When we were there, it didn't look like this at all. But because we were there before, people had cell phones and digital cameras. And so if you took a picture, it was a film. And, it's not easy to record everything that you see like it is today. Today, you can record everything, and then you can really get good talks as a result of it. Anyway, across the road from us was the Kievsky Vokzal, which is the Kiev station where the trains go to Kiev, to Ukraine. It also was the local underground station for getting through. We got there on a Saturday, and on Monday I had to start work in this office, which had two people from the London office there. I was the first technical person in Russia, so I had to go and start geology from scratch there. And so we looked at the map and we decided, well, I've got to get tomorrow on Monday morning. I've got to get from the hotel, which was here, Kievsky Vokzal. I've got to get to our office, which was there on Ulitsa Tverskaya, the main sort of Champs-Élysées of Paris, of Moscow. And that's where our office was. Our office was in this building here. Nice old sort of Victorian Russian, no, I don't suppose Victorian, but earlier Russian building, which we shared with various people. But to get there was a bit of a problem. So I was going to go on the underground. So Renee and I went on the Sunday and just rode the underground. Now, the first thing you see when you get an underground is these signs saying the name of the place. They're about 20 foot long and about 20 characters, and it's all in bloody Cyrillic. So it's kind of hard. So we thought, well, we had to practice. So we did a trip all around the underground. So that on the Monday morning, I could then look at the underground map, and it's obvious, as you can see, it's pretty clear. It's no problem at all. So we had to get from Kievskaya, there's Kievskaya station, to Tverskaya. And by now, I'd been studying Russian for a while, and I could read these things, believe it or not. I knew what they meant. But it was still quite daunting, because at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people riding the metro. It's just crush after crush and pushing through exits and entries. And it was very daunting, but I got there. We've all heard about the Russian metro, the underground. It's the most beautiful metro in the world. This is a more recent picture. Obviously, I got these pictures off the internet because I didn't, as I say, have a cell phone to snap off when I was there. But beautiful, beautiful stations. And this one even has a sign on the ground here, says Vychod, which is exit, and it says there, exit. There, yeah, lovely. It says it in English, so they're starting to cater for English people too. And there's even a big fancy ticket machine that here. And we didn't have things like that when we were there. But this is a kind of a plain station. This is what some of them look like when there's nobody there. They're all beautiful. There's another one. Amazing places. No money was spared building a station. So we eventually, after being in there for a while, we thought, well, where are we going to live? And we had to try and find a house somewhere. Moscow's 10 million people and they all speak Russian and there's no housing available. We didn't want to go into a Russian flat. And you can see on this picture here, this is a typical area where Russian high apartment buildings. I mean, these are 20-story buildings just covering vast areas. We found an American-Russian joint venture where one of the guys who was in our office from London was working already. So through him, we got a contact and went in there and looked at this place called Rosinka. It was some distance out of Moscow, but it was the place where we got a house. And this is what it looks like today. This was our house just down here in the corner. This was the entrance where we had guards with Kalashnikov rifles. This was just a slope going down to the river when we were there. And this was just a river. It didn't have fountains. It didn't have a beach. And there were houses just in this area here. And they were all expats. So the Americans were building these houses by making container-sized pieces of building, which they could then take 4 of them and put them together and rip off the pieces between, and it was a house. So they built this amazing houses, all made of plastic, but they worked. They were really nice. I mean, Renee's kitchen had a garbage disposal unit. She has a laundry. She had dishwashers. She had washing machines. Everything worked fantastically. It was warm. It had central heating. It had air conditioning. It was carpeted. It had a beautiful fireplace in the sitting room. We had a garden outside, which we developed. In winter, it got covered in snow. And in summer, when the snow melted, all the flowers came through again. So it was quite good fun, actually. And we met a lot of people there. And we became an expatriate ghetto because we all had a common enemy, which was the Russians. So we were all get back Russians. We're looking after ourselves here. That was our house when we got there. We first lived in this house here, and then we moved to this one. You can see that's 4 containers put together and put a roof on them. And this plastic on the outside looks like weatherboard. I put my Weber too close to it one day and it started to melt. That wasn't so clever. This was our view. There were no trees growing there then. This was what it's like now, where the Russian oligarchs have built huge houses there as well because they like the idea of this estate living as well. So it's gotten much fancier now. There was a road down to the river, which we used to go walking in summer, and we would walk across into the forest. And it went past a dam, and in summer the Russians would all swim because it got hot. It got 30 plus 35 sometimes in Moscow in summer, down to minus 35 in winter. And so they all swam there because in winter it wasn't so good. This is the same view. It was kind of icy and cold. And then there's Rosinka, our village, and we lived there. So we'd go down there, cross over the ridge, and then we'd go walk in the summer. We could walk in this forest, which was beautiful, and gather mushrooms. And see, we found a dead body lying there once because the snow melts. People leave things lying there, they get covered. When snow melts in a country like this, it exposes all manner of evils. You can't believe it. Anyway, in winter, we would ski around in that forest and get hopelessly lost, but we'd get back somehow. And of course, the Russians, they live in apartments, and they want to get out of their apartments to get some fresh air. So they would all go down with these big drills, and they would drill with a hole about that size down into the ice, so they could fish through there. And then they'd drop their little line sinker down and bait down there, and they'd sit there and drink their vodka all day and catch little fish this size. And that was a great day. This was in the village next door to us. This was a typical house in winter. When you go to if you go to Canada, if you go to Toronto in winter, they're blizzards and they blow snow up into huge drifts, and you can't walk on the streets. I mean, Toronto's is like a mall underground under the whole center of the city, and then you go take lifts up to get into all the buildings because you can't go out in the streets. But in Moscow in winter, the temperature can be lovely and cold and crisp, but the wind doesn't blow in winter in Moscow for some reason. We never had a wind in 3 years we were there. So the snow settles, it looks beautiful. It's fantastic. It's deep. You walk in it, it crunches, it's soft. Very nice. This is a typical Russian house. So they built their houses out of wood, and inside you can see it's heavy timber, and they built them around a central fireplace made of bricks. And that fire never goes out in the winter. It certainly goes out in the summer, but in the winter that fire is stoked all the time. And the owner, the gentleman of the house, and his wife would live on their bed, which would be on top of the stove here, and the kids would be spread around. So that was the hub of life, was this fireplace, because it's so blooming cold everywhere else. Okay, so let's get back to Russia. I think so after we'd done our investigations and tried to do our thing here in Sakha, we also got wind of exploration up near Arkhangelsk, and this is the Kola Peninsula here, and the Kola Craton, and the Russians were doing some exploration here, so we really pushed hard to get into bed with them. And there's Arkhangelsk. You can see it there. It was a famous port during the war, and now it's quite a big city. And again, look at this map. You can see forests and lakes and sea, but you can see two white dots there and there. Those are mines. The mines stand out. Eh? And there, that's a map. So there's Arkhangelsk town. Again, the map is completely stupid because it calls this Lomonosov deposit. It shows it right next to Arkhangelsk, and this Grib deposit, they're actually just there and there. And if you look at another map, it has different names again. Suddenly it's called Zolotsitsa and not Lomonosov. And there are other things around there. Those are all the kimberlites they found there. So I used to go out there and talk to them, and they would show us where they were drilling, but they would never show us what they drilled into. They would never show us coal. Obviously, they were getting kimberlite, and they were just starting their exploration there then. And we tried desperately to get involved with them through joint ventures, etc. But the Russians, they say yes, but they mean no. And you would sign a contract, and the next day they would dishonor it. I mean, it was just impossible to deal with these people. So there's the city of Arkhangelsk. There's the airport. I spent 3 days once waiting for a plane out of Arkhangelsk because every time we wanted to fly, then Moscow was hemmed in with snow and cloud and ice. And then when that cleared, we'd be hemmed in, and it was impossible. Winter made traveling very difficult in Russia. So there you can see, there's Arkhangelsk, the town, and there you can see those two mines, quite big affairs. And what's interesting about them, unlike the ones in Siberia, they've done away with the idea of housing people on the mines and setting up all that housing infrastructure. They now must fly them in and out, because if you look at them more closely, there's no town around them. They're just mines in the middle of nowhere. And that's the Grib mine. And I managed to identify that these are actually quarters here. So they have got people living there, but in a very small area. And this mine has ore reserves of close to 100 million carats. It's enormous, enormous reserves. And this one here, the Lomonosov mine, which is a twin pipe, you can see the two holes here, has reserves of 220 million carats. I mean, this is just beyond belief. We've just numbers that we don't understand. But again, they're Russian numbers. So can we believe them? We probably shouldn't. I mean, they're probably exaggerated like anything. But good luck to them if they can market 1 billion carats in the next 50 years, they'll be doing something because the world's going off diamonds a bit. Okay, so that was the diamonds. Then we got wind. We were also keeping our eyes open for other things in Russia. And then they said to us, oh, they've got some gold deposit they want us to look at out here. This is getting into Chukotka province right out here, and there's just across the way from Alaska. So we flew into Magadan, which is a long flight. There's Magadan, there's the Kamchatka Peninsula, there's Alaska, and we arrived at the airport, which is quite a smart place. This is a mining engineer who was with me, and this is our interpreter from Moscow, and these are two local geologists, our hosts. And while we're here, I did mention toilets in airports, and I thought I'd just show you some nice ones. This is a clean, civilized toilet in Russia. I kid you not. No seat. Normally that bucket would be full of things that I wouldn't want to describe. But I mean, it's just awful. And there's no loo paper or anything. There's probably a chain that pulls for the water, which doesn't work. And the boys' room wasn't much better. I mean, imagine going in there in the dark and falling over. You'd break a leg before you got in. So the loos were pretty primitive places, but that's what we had to live with. Okay, so we were in Magadan and we needed to get out. You can see this up to here somewhere they wanted to take us. So once again, we boarded our MIL M8 helicopter and off we went. And we flew over the area. This is what it looks like. So that area, well, I'm just diverted, but that area is very popular for Russians. It's all wilderness. In summer, it's beautiful for fishing. They go salmon fishing in the rivers, and they shoot bears because the bears all come for the salmon. So there are lots of bears there. And if you're really excited, you go down the Kamchatka Peninsula. It's part of the Ring of Fire, so there are volcanoes everywhere. It's all a nice place. And also in autumn, it looks really beautiful with all the different colors in the trees. But that's what they're after, the sockeye salmon. And they're after it for the meat, which is fantastic food. And that's why the bears are all there just pulling these fish out of the rivers. And for the ikra. So the ikra is the caviar. And that's what it looks like when it's better presented on a nice bun. And it's delicious stuff. It's really delicious. And you can buy it in tins called tsaritsa, Alaskan something or other salmon. 8,500 rand a kilo. If you think that's expensive, have you ever heard of beluga caviar? Of course you have, the black caviar. So that's what black caviar beluga looks like. And what do you think that costs per kilogram? The other was 8,500. 600,000 rand a kilogram. Okay? So if you get to eat some beluga caviar, be aware that every mouthful is costing somebody thousands and thousands. And it's just ridiculous. Okay, so we were flying in our MIL M8 helicopter, and this was the view out of the window. It was autumn, the snow was melting, and we were going to look at a gold prospect, which none of us knew much about, but we thought we'd go and look at it. And it was quite nice, actually. There's a river with the melting ice and snow washing down a floodplain, meandering through the hills. And there we flew over the beach, and this is the sea. This is the sea here, and this is the beach. And we were flying along, and we landed there even and had a walk on the beach. And as we went further north, it started getting whiter and snowier until eventually it kind of gets like that. And that's not so good, because at the same time we had a snowstorm, and we were flying through a snowstorm, so you couldn't see anything at all. This is when you say to your pilot, please just keep your eyes on the instruments, because if you lose your horizon in a helicopter, it's the worst thing that can happen. You just go straight into the ground. So you couldn't distinguish between mountain, earth, sky, cloud, snow. It was all white. And so the pilot climbed down the ladder that goes up to his cockpit up there, and he came and told us, he said, guys, I don't think we're going to get there. So we were sitting there sipping our drinks, as we do. The Russians were sipping their drinks in vodka, these 2-liter jugs of vodka, drinking it straight from the bottle. And he said, well, I can't continue. I've got to find a place. So we flew around and we flew around. Eventually, we found ourselves, we landed at a little silver mine, which was about there somewhere near Umsukchan. And we had to spend 3 days there waiting for the snow to stop before we could get back to Magadan. Needless to say, we never found our gold mine or gold prospect, because now time was run out. They had other things to do. We had other things to do. So we headed back to Magadan, and then we flew back to Moscow. Now, this was an interesting flight. So from Magadan to Moscow, you cross 8 time zones. It's a distance of 6,500 kilometers, yes. And I got onto my Aeroflot plane. De Beers, I got a letter from De Beers saying, you may not fly with Aeroflot. I said, I'm in Russia. How am I going to travel? Eh? I flew Aeroflot every day of my life nearly. And so I got on this plane, and Aeroflot being Aeroflot, the blind wasn't working on the window here. So now you're in the northern hemisphere and the sun sets in the southwest, not in the northwest like it does here. So it's in the southwest. So the sun is shining in my eyes. Boom. And of course, now you're flying in a plane. It's above all the clouds. So there's no cloud. The sun is there. And it's in my eyes. And it was like that at 6:30 when we started our flight in Magadan. And when we landed in Moscow 8 hours later, it was still 6:30 and the sun was still shining in my eyes. It's the worst flight of my life. I was terrible. Okay, so show you something about life. So the Russians build these apartments. This is a picture I took, as you can see, there's an old Lada in the foreground. Nowadays, they all drive Mercedes Benzes. They build them out of prefabricated slabs of concrete, which they pick up and dump and glue together. And they are awful, awful, awful buildings. There's another one. This is now one that's been completed. They have stairwells or lift shafts, which are usually used for throwing rubbish down. They don't have much in the way of gardens around them. They are just miserable, horrible, all the same, all tiny, no cupboards, nothing, just so basic it's beyond belief. This was in Yakutsk, the capital of Sakha province. We went there once. We once got a visit from our big boss in London came out, and he wanted to go and talk to the people in Yakutsk, and we couldn't charter a plane in Moscow of adequate size. So we chartered an Ilyushin airliner. It took 250 of people, but there were only 4 of us on board. So we flew in our Ilyushin across Russia from Moscow to Yakutsk, about an 8-hour flight. And we did our business, and then we wanted to go back. And we got to the airport. There were 250 people lined up there, and they said, they said, "What are you doing here?" They said, "No, can't we have a lift to Moscow, please? Our plane's been banned or been stuck on the ground, grounded." So we gave 250 Russians a lift. They were delighted. So you might wonder about these pipes. So in Russia, they have power plants that generate a lot of heat. They're usually nuclear, and they generate a lot of heat, and that heat is used to heat water, and they do it centrally. So in your apartment in Russia, you don't have a geyser like we have here. You have water piped in, hot water, and there's no tap where you can turn it on or off. There's a tap at the bath where you can let the water in the bath or not, but you can't. There's a radiator. There's old-fashioned cast iron radiators which the water runs through. That had no tap on it in the Russian apartment when we were there. So Russians that thing would be hot for them. And as summer comes, it might start getting warm. But if the authorities haven't turned off the hot water, then you're there in the heat. And that when they turn it off, you've got no hot water at all in the apartment. So you have cold water in the summer, and then they turn it on in the winter. And if they turn it on too late, you start freezing before they turn it off. So they control it all, and it goes around the cities in these pipes, and they're raised like this over the road so that trucks and things can go underneath them. So it's kind of primitive, kind of primitive. There's an old Russian house in the city, so they've had, they're built of wood. This is a big house, probably considered quite a smart house in its day. But now, as I say, they all live in modern apartment blocks, 20-story blocks. Again, they're still just piled on top of each other. When we got to Russia, these streets, we'd often see a tanker parked in the road because the petrol stations didn't work so well. They didn't have them in most places. And my driver had to fill up my car, and he would search for hours for fuel sometimes. And then you'd find a tanker at the side of the road selling fuel just from his tank. We used to see tankers at the side of the road stopped, and the guys got, well, not just tankers, but big trucks with the trucks always have their fuel tank on the outside mounted on the other chassis. And you'd see them parked there with a fire lit underneath the fuel tank because the fuel tank has become viscous in the cold and they can't get the thing to go. So they'd warm it up to get it liquid so they could start their vehicle. I mean, they lived very much on the edge. So they lived in these ghastly apartment blocks. I mean, you can imagine, this is not a very clear picture, but imagine living in a complex like that. I think it's got 20,000 flats or something in just one complex. It's pretty awful. That's why they like to get out into the country to their dachas where they can grow their vegetables and walk their dogs. And so in getting into Moscow, some views of Moscow, you've all heard of the Hotel Metropole. That's where the famous film, A Gentleman in Moscow, the book was written about it, and it was filmed there. And we spent many days, many hours, should I say, in the Metropole, having dinners, etc., in their beautiful dining room, and where music would be played in the balconies. There'd be people playing violins and singing. It was all very elegant and smart. And then just around the corner was the Bolshoi Theater. the Bolshoi Theatre used to be the preserve of all Russians. Anybody could go to the Bolshoi Theatre, but when we got there, suddenly it became the preserve of the rich and the corrupt. So you didn't, if you wanted to go to the Bolshoi Theatre, you didn't buy a ticket. You went on the day you wanted to go and you approached a tout. And the tout would charge you more than you'd pay for a normal ticket, but you'd get a guaranteed seat. He would have a book of tickets, duplicates of the things they've sold already. And you'd buy his tickets for paying, I don't know how many $100, and he'd lead you in and he'd say, here are your seats, and there you go, and here are your tickets. And somebody else would come and say, but these are our tickets. And he'd say, no, sorry, off you go out. And he would kick everybody else out. And so if you were corrupt and you were on the side of the evil, you could get in to see the things at the Bolshoi Theatre. And that's what we did sometimes. So at interval, we didn't dare ever leave our seats and get up because somebody else would take them. So you just stay put. You don't try and drink champagne. And that's what it looks like inside. Very elegant place. We went there many times. And there's another one, the Mariinsky Theatre, which in St. Petersburg, which the theme is blue, and it's even more beautiful. And then some views of Moscow, Red Square. That's a museum in the background with the famous GUM store here. It was just the biggest Russian department store when we were there. And this is the start of the Kremlin on this side. That's inside the GUM store now. It's like a mall, a shopping mall. So it's full of all the big names like Prada and Gucci, and it's just, and everybody's very elegant and everybody's smart and they've got beautiful flowers. It wasn't like that when we were there. I promise you, it was terrible. And that's again from the outside. When we were there, we'd walk on Red Square and we'd be approached by gypsies who would distract you. One lot would distract you while the other one stole your handbag or put his hand in your pocket and took your whatever. Oh, it was hard work there. There's quite an interesting site, the church, the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. This is on the Moscow River. There used to be a massive cathedral here. Stalin, in his wisdom, when he killed between 20 and 30 million of his brightest citizens because they were too clever for him, so he just murdered them. And it was like he went into a garden and he just plucked out all the flowers and the vegetables and just left the weeds. And that's what the Russians are left with today. All the clever people, all the intellectual people were just slaughtered by Stalin, and he knocked down thousands and thousands of churches. He just said, this is out and finished. So he wanted to build a huge statue of Lenin on this site with an office up, and Lenin was with his hand outstretched like this, and he wanted to have his office up at the top of his fingers. But the conditions, the foundations always kept collapsing, nothing worked. So then they tried to put a swimming pool there, and even that didn't work. So then they went back and built a cathedral, and it's working perfectly. It's a massive cathedral. I haven't seen it. It's there since we left. If you go to St. Petersburg, of course, you go to places like the Hermitage Museum. That's the subject of a presentation alone because the amount of art and artifacts that are available in the Hermitage is beyond belief. There's another beautiful cathedral in St. Petersburg, St. Isaac's. We used to go by train to St. Petersburg, and we had to lock the door and tie it up with wire because otherwise they'd come in and rob you in the night. Once the train arrived in Moscow station from St. Petersburg, and nobody got out of one compartment, and they what's happened? And they went in and they found everybody had been gassed. So all their stuff had been stolen. So they just fed gas into the air conditioning system, knocked everybody out, and went and ripped them all off. This is Renee standing in the foreground of this little church in a garden. So all the churches, those that remain, and there are a lot remain because they had many, have all got their beautiful domes, many of them gilt. Like this is at Sergeyev Posad, the famous monastery northeast of Moscow. And there are many of those around still, despite the degradation. There's another one, I don't even know the name, but the beautiful gilt onion domes predominate everywhere. And then the other thing that Russia's famous for, their cemeteries. This is in the Novodevichy Cemetery, I think. That is Tupolev, the man who invented the Tupolev aircraft. So they didn't have cemeteries where they used religious symbols to commemorate their dead. They used symbols which represented what they did in life. So he was an aircraft guy, so he had his aircraft. There's somebody who designed a tank, obviously. This was his headstone. There's one of the first people, probably Gagarin or somebody, who went into space. And there's a famous actor who was obviously well commemorated and well liked because people go and put flowers to his grave. So that's really it. So what did I achieve? Have I run out of time? Yes. I absolutely nothing. The Russians were impossible to work with, never honoring contracts or providing credible information. If the Chinese, and I hope I'm not offending anybody when I say it, but I say if the Chinese are considered inscrutable, the Russians are twice as bad. They just wanted our money, of which they got nothing from me. They were always looking for handouts for everything. It was an amazing experience, but a complete waste of time. And after I left, after 3 years of trying to get some business started, I eventually got the guy who I wanted to go there in the first place. It was a Polish geologist who would get the language more easily. And he went there for 3 years and he achieved nothing as well. You just can't do it. So that's it. Thanks very much. Not much geology, I'm afraid.
Well, that was wonderful, Ronnie. Thanks very much. Okay, questions, answers? No. You'd still survive.
I'm a survivor.
Ronnie, how did the Russians market their time?
Through De Beers. So De Beers, when they first started mining it nearly in the Dutchney in 1965, De Beers controlled the diamond industry and wanted to control it. So they immediately made overtures through front companies to the Russians, and it was never admitted, the Russians would never admit that they worked through De Beers, and De Beers would never say that they got the diamonds from Russia. It was all done through front companies, Russian fronts and De Beers fronts, and De Beers marketed all their diamonds for a long time. That's why when we went there in 93, we'd already had an office going there from 92, and those were two representatives from the London office who were there to service the buying agreements because now they could be out in the open for the first time. And that was the time, 1992, 93. We got there when Yeltsin was in power. Gorbachev had just been his predecessor, and Gorbachev is the guy who did the perestroika and the glasnost and opening up of Russia. And Russia became a very changed place. When we got there in 93, you still had to queue. You walked with your shopping bag down the street and you still had to queue to buy stuff. And there was one supermarket, it was Finnish. Renee could go to that supermarket if she wanted to, but everything was in Finnish. She didn't know whether she was buying washing liquid or loo cleaner or window cleaner. You know, it was just, you had no idea. And in a city of 10 million people, that was quite a rough way for Renee to do it. And our driver would take her places and help her with interpretation, etc. But it wasn't easy. But the glasnost and the perestroika came and things opened up and we started dealing with them openly. Yeah.
Today, where were they?
Today, they're doing their damnedest to go independent. So they have the big Rusalmaz, the big Russian diamond companies, who are doing a lot of trying to do marketing on their own now. Yeah, they've kind of broken with De Beers, I think, to a large extent.
Yeah, well, I mean, the key thing too is the monopoly was broken by, first the Americans, and De Beers paid a big fine to be able to go back and actually go to.
You've killed us, Henny. Henny, put on your microphone so we can hear.